Yeah, and on top of that, you had to take a blood oath, a literal blood oath, and I still have my contract.
That's
It
awesome.
it did change me. I am not, I am still an American by birthright. But I also learned from that, right? At first it chafed, and I was like, this is BS. Everyone's equal. Why do I have to grovel like this? But at the same time, the more you do it, and is there more to this? One of the key ingredients of a virtue is that it's a moral excellence. It's a behavior or a quality that represents an ideal, right? And it's a habit.
Virtue, honor, discipline. These words sound powerful, but what do they actually mean in daily life? In today's episode, we sit down with Greg Ellis, who spent 15 years in Japan training in the oldest surviving samurai school. He took a blood oath to study Bushido and discovered the deep truth behind living with purpose and integrity. By the end of this conversation, you'll have a new perspective on what it means to live with virtue and how ancient wisdom can shape our modern world. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crack the Code podcast. I'm your host, Clint Baggett, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Shane Russell and Shannon Baggett. And today we have with us our good friend, Greg Ellis. So I'm very excited to talk to Greg. He just came back from an amazing trip in Japan, and we're excited to hear what he found out and what he discovered while he's over there. To hear a little bit more, I'm fascinated with the culture and just there's so much amazing stuff. I'm sure he's got beautiful things to tell us. Today, what we wanted to talk about was virtue. And so we're really happy to have Greg here with us to hear his insights and thoughts on this, as we've talked to him before. And he has a lot of interesting ideas. I think it'd be great for the audience to hear and listen to and see what you resonate with. So with that, we'll kind of get started with this. So I'll kick it off by just putting the question out to the audience and ourselves. Have we ever really thought about what virtue is? What is a virtue? How do you establish a virtue? How does virtue impact culture? What is not a virtue and how do you tell the difference? So that's really what we want to explore into, is understanding what virtue is, how it shows up in our life, what virtues are important to us, and why are virtues important. And with that, Greg, let me bring you into the conversation. If you want to say hi to the audience and get us going, I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are on virtue, and or maybe if you want to, like, let's hear, did you find any good examples of virtue while you were in Japan?
Absolutely. Thank you for the kind introduction. Uh, yeah, so virtue, it's a very topical topic um, for me as it pertains to the trip I just took to Japan over the last week, because I'd lived there for 15 years, right out of graduation from college until 2012, and what had compelled me to go there was a fascination with the culture of the samurai
Oh, wow.
from a young age, about around the age of 8, when the original Shogun television series came out, 19 around I want to say 1980, and uh, came from a family background that was not strong in the church, didn't have a set of rituals, customs other than the standard, Christmases and so forth. And for the first time, I came face to face on this TV screen with this culture that was all about virtues, and customs and everything sort of synchronistically tied together. Um, and it just captured me to the point where even early high school, I had already made up my mind that I was going to find a college in Iowa, where I'm from, that had a Japanese language program, and was going to find a way to make it there and pursue the dream of studying samurai arts. And
Wow.
yeah, the whole Bushido ethic, done reading there. Of course, lots of folks are familiar with the term Bushido. Um, it's a relatively newer term from the late 18th from the late 1800s, but there were older belief systems around Bushido and Shinto that the samurai um, had they were very religious and very superstitious. Uh, and so the Buddhist ethics, Shinto ethics, their own kind of samurai ethics merged into a almost like a samurai sub cult or religion. And so that had all captured me because, not coming from a strong family background of these are our beliefs, these are our values, these are, our rituals and so forth. I felt drawn to that sort of structure, a pre-built framework, if you will.
Yeah,
Uh,
I,
yeah,
I like that. And so just to jump in, like, it's interesting, you know, you talk about how as a child seeing the Shogun, like, you know, you recognize that virtue and that culture and kind of the gap, right? You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, I
yes,
want this, and there's that early attraction. And now I think most people know what a samurai is. I know what a samurai is. I've seen lots of representations, but the idea I get, is of course that big ornate armor with the helmet, and samurai swords. And there's something that's just kind of like it's almost like taken for granted. Like if you just watch any representation, there's always about honor and virtue and stuff. But I'll be honest, when I was talking to you the other week, I realized like I don't know very much about the samurai culture or any of that. And so when you're talking about Bushido and all this, it's very informative, and I think it's fascinating. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and maybe some of your time there in Japan, like what that experience was like for you and maybe some of the training you went through.
sure. Um, so the samurai were one of the four classes. Many civilizations have had various classes in their uh, sort of hierarchical societies. The Indian subcontinent. They had their warrior classes, their Brahmanic or clerical classes. Japan was very similar in that sense. It had the aristocracy, it had the warrior class, and we're going back into the early, um, you know, 1100s, 1200s,
Wow.
onward. Um, and even before that, all societies have needed warriors. And so they had four classes, the samurai, the aristocracy above, the emperor, and then his, you know, court, then the samurai. So the traditional term for samurai uh, is bushi, and it's two characters. Uh, One is the first character is basically to make war, and the second is person.
Oh, okay.
And
And so
so,
Bushi, that's where Bushido, right, would come from naturally. Then is that's kind of the core root of samurai is Bushi.
yeah, and samurai is a different character, but basically it means to serve, or one who serves. And so they were the second, hierarchically the second of the four classes, and then the merchants, and then the farmers. And so that was sort of the traditional structure going into uh, the mid to late 1800s, when the reformations and the internal strife, where the samurai were eventually as a class banned, and the samurai were forbidden to wear swords. They had to cut their top knots, which was the traditional mark. The sword and the top knot were the traditional sort of, shall I say, the physical, uh,
Yeah.
markings of a warrior in Japan.
Yeah, that kind of cultural representation that you do with your body, right? Like whether it's a
Yes,
haircut or a tattoo or something, right? It was their trademark.
that's right.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, there's of course the gritty realities of the samurai, um, and warrior classes and all civilizations can be pretty unseemly. The ideal, even in the what was formerly known as Christendom, the ideal of the chivalrous knight versus the reality could be quite different, right? And in fact,
Yeah.
the chivalrous knight, its origin in the Christendom didn't actually come from the warrior aristocracy, the kings and the vassals in the European kingdoms. It actually started from uh, 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 the what shall we call it, the priestly warrior class.
I'm almost more like that paladin, kind of like the holy monk or Templar type thing.
That it actually comes from the Templars.
Oh,
The temp
really? From the Templars? Okay, yeah, because I was just
so
watching something on that the other day. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
that's right. And so, in the West, the Templars were the first to put aside the hedonistic materialism to serve a greater cause, and defend the weak, to be chaste, and to, etc. Until the Templars came and they made such an overpowering impression on all the rest of the knights and the priesthood, and so forth. But the actual knight was just kind of a rabble-rousing thug. It,
Right. Yeah.
and even
Just
and
just a strong soldier, the best swordsman.
exactly, and in Japan, one could say that there was a lot of thuggery as well because whoever has the swords and you know takes whatever they want. But you know, in Japan, I would say that the closeness of the warriors, because in the older part of Japanese history, when the emperor still actually had power, because for a large part of Japanese history, the was always sort of a figurehead, almost a puppet, really, for a large part of its history. And then it was the warrior clan that really called the shots and so forth. But the proximity of the two to each other very early on did rub off on the samurai or the bushi, to where they had to develop more refined etiquette, manners, customs, rules, and so forth, much earlier than the Western knight. And
Yeah.
so they started to develop these higher ideals, earlier on in terms of proper etiquette behavior. When should you brandish your sword, versus keep it sheathed, right? And so
Yeah.
they did develop a sort of an ethic much, much earlier than in the West, to where it developed, into sort of what was written in the late 1800s, by a Japanese author known as Bushido, right? Um,
Yeah.
and and so that was my attraction very on early on to that, was there was this whole system. Of course, I was a young man with spit and vinegar, and well, physicality, weapons, you know, it was exotic, and but it also had this whole history and whole system of etiquette. It wasn't about in its current formations, the Japanese arts, have long since lost the notion of just beat people up and be stronger. It was about how do you develop a human being.
Yeah.
War is horrible. Uh, Taking another's life, even permanently injuring them, is horrible. It's a necessary it's a necessary evil. And so, how do you develop, you know, well, in my case, how do you develop men, who are guided by a higher noble cause and who will only use the skills and the strength that they have for noble causes, as opposed to
Yeah.
pure gratification and thuggery. That was what originally attracted me to it.
Makes me think of
Yeah.
Star
So,
Wars.
oh, go ahead, Shane. What's that?
It makes me think of Star Wars, you know what I'm saying? Like
Right, the Jedi
how,
Knights.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a connection there, right?
No, it seems like a,
Lucas, the samurai, the lightsaber, and a lot of the ethics of the Jedi in terms of combat. He borrowed from the samurai, Japanese samurai culture.
Yeah, I've
So
heard that even originally he was going to call them Jedi Templars instead of Jedi Knights. So it is that same kind of warrior monk mindset, you know, and it really sets the platform. And so thank you so much for that. It was really fascinating. I appreciate you sharing all of that because it sets the stage for what is virtue about, right? You know, and it's
yes,
if we're gonna anywhere you're gonna have people who can demonstrate and practice and develop and wield power, ethics have to come in behind that because what are you going to do with that power? When is it right to use it? When is it right? When is it not right to use it? And you're right, war is horrible. I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced it, and so at some point we have to be strong, we have to be mindful, and we have to know that everybody's got free will, so people are going to do what people are going to do, and there needs to be an ability to protect your culture, protect your family, protect your people, and maintain some level of civility so that you can function in large groups. And so these things, you're right, they're necessary evils that as we kind of nations grow and raise, but at some point too, like when does the warrior get to be that warrior in the garden, right? And like that's a lot of what I like to think about is having people enter into that mindset where you can be prepared to defend yourself, be prepared to to do what is necessary to survive or to thrive or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, if those things aren't necessary, you just garden, right? Like just be at peace and be happy. And how do we, know that we have those abilities in us, but then, weld them. And I think that's where that the idea of virtue, at least for me, like the virtuous training or the codes of conduct and stuff, it kind of comes in. And I think virtue maybe gives us like a guidepost, right? To say like, okay, this is why we practice this, and this is the meaning behind it. It's so that we can, wield this power, but do it with honor and chivalry.
exactly. When you see for example, in the school that I joined, it's the oldest living surviving samurai school in Japan, 650 plus years old on its 22nd headmaster, I want to say.
Wow.
Going back to, yeah, the do the math. It's back into the Warring States period, um, when war was a constant. Um, and and so when you are, you know, it's so old that they don't have belts. Like belts are a modern invention from the 20th century onward with Japanese martial arts, that were a modern invention. But in the old days, you could go years and years as an apprentice under a sword master or a spear master or a bow master, etc. And you might get a scroll from them. It could be like mine, which is about 20 feet long, or
Oh
it just
wow.
could be a piece of paper that they say, yes, this guy studied under me. My name is this. I'm the whatever headmaster of the school. Here you go. Um, but the thing about, those arts is that they are very much embedded, right? And when you go to Japan, when you become fluent in the language, reading, writing, when in my case, most of my 15 years was working in Japanese, uh, not as a foreign expat in a sort of an English bubble, if you will, where I had like
Gotcha.
secretaries or admins who would do all the interpreting and stuff for me. And so, um, when I joined the school in 1999, uh, they had, for foreigners like me, there were two rules. One was you had to be fluent in Japanese, and you had to be a resident of Japan. Uh, and the reason
Oh
was
wow.
because, yeah, and on top of that, you had to take a blood oath, a literal blood oath, and I still have my contract.
That's awesome.
And so, the reason being that they had a recognition that, this isn't some McDojo phenomenon. If you don't understand Japanese, if you can't read Japanese, you can't understand the long history of the samurai, Japanese history, all the etiquette, there are all these words with rich meaning that will come up within, the learning that the teacher, because you're not just learning the art, you're learning the history, the mythology, the values, and all these are deeply intertwined in Japanese history and culture. So if you can't understand what you're being told, you can't read it, and you're not there and absorbing it, there's just too great a distance to really truly understand the ultimate meanings of what the art is. And so that sort of aligns to my study of belief systems, uh, trying to understand, dabbling in Buddhism, Quakerism, all sorts of stuff, trying to find quote unquote my religion, Buddha, martial arts as well, is that just like this school, Katori Shinto-ryu is its name. It's very famous in the Japanese martial arts world, but it is embedded within this large, larger system, right? And so when we
Yeah.
see the rituals, when I bow, when I take my sword out of my belt, I put it in front of me, raise it up to me, take 2 steps forward, I kneel, put the sword down, take 2 steps back, get into, you know, squatting position, bow, and all of this, you see this ritual, but what does it really mean? Right? It's just a bunch of movements, but then you have to drill like the iceberg. You have to go beneath the water and then go back. And then then that's when you see the rules of the samurai, the etiquettes to keep war you know, from breaking out. The fact that a samurai, when they wanted to display peace, would keep their sword in their right hand, right, and not their left, because all samurai were trained to fight with their right hand as the dominant, even though it's a two-handed sword, right? And
Yeah.
so by putting it in your right hand, it basically disabled you from being able to do a quick draw, right? And so these little things that if you don't understand the larger context, they just look like arbitrary things. And so
Yeah,
that's
right.
when
Like, why are they making this so difficult? Just say hello.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you start to figure out, okay, well, these are based on a set of rules, which are set up based on a set of ideals or virtues, which are based on a deeper set of values, right? And if you drill down to these values, you get to a bedrock of foundational beliefs, right? And the
Yeah.
foundational beliefs are the things where, if you say, well, what is it? What's the difference between a value and a foundational belief? The foundational belief is this thing where if you ask a person to try to justify it logically, they'll come up empty-handed and say, I feel it, or I just believe that. That's just that's my position, right? It's a thing that is so fundamental to their composition, their soul, their psyche, whatever. There's
Yeah.
no rationalization for it, right? And then those core beliefs that every society, every person has are the bedrock upon which you then go back up and add on. Well, I value this, I value that. These are the virtues. Based on those values, these are the virtues that I believe in. Like the samurai who believed in integrity, respect, courage, honor, compassion, honesty, loyalty, and self-control. Those are the 8 virtues of Bushido. And those 8 are called out for very good reasons, because when you're a warrior, those are some of the virtues that will prevent you from starting wars or conflicts or a sword death match,
Right.
uh, and that will keep the warrior group together. There's these reasons that those are the virtues that they call out versus, say, other virtues, like introspection that a Buddhist monk may have, or patience and other things, right? And so that got me thinking as I was studying religions, and then these samurai, this whole society, got me thinking about, well, what is the structure of a belief system? What is the scaffolding? How would you reverse engineer one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really it's fascinating. I've just to kind of reflect back on what you've been sharing with us. So you talk about the ritualistic behavior and the depth of it, and in a way, what it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that there was communication beyond words. When we think
Yes,
about right now, we have all this information that comes to us in words, books and all this kind of stuff, and that's kind of our predominant form of communication is just talking, and we develop language for this. But there were civilizations in ancient South America that were thriving, massive civilizations that had no written languages, and so there are ways to communicate. They had rituals, they had, gestures and stuff like that. So there was that communication. Look, if I've got my sword on the left side, I'm not here to attack you. I'm in the mode of peace or whatever the case may be. And so it was this kind of behavioral communication. And to your point, as you kind of dug into, like, why do they have these virtues? Because it was necessary to be able to maintain the strength and the posture and the security without letting that become, lead into meaningless conflict or unnecessary war or fights or whatever the case may be.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's fantastic, man. So you're also talking there about foundational beliefs, and I, when we talked before, we touched on this a little bit, and I really like the way that you express that foundational belief. And I hadn't really heard it articulated like that. And it got me thinking since we were there. I was like, well, what are my foundational beliefs? And
Yes.
so I explored, like, and I realized there was years ago, I kind of went out on the same quest for myself. Like, for me,
Hmm.
it was, what is life about? What is happiness? Well, how does the world work? Like,
Yes.
look, I hear all this stuff. Everybody's got a prescription for, what life and psychology and happiness and success and definitions, but what is it really? What does it mean to me? What is it personally? How do I view the world? And that set me out on, a quest to discover and develop my foundational beliefs. And since, I've been reflecting on that, I realized it was one of my foundational beliefs, that thing that I believe, and I don't really have a justification for it. There's nothing I can point to say this is absolutely why, but and I don't care how many people disagree with me, my mind never changes on this thing. And that foundational belief is that we all have a path to walk, right? And our path is the path we choose. Our path is something that we create. And as we come into full recognition of our ability to choose the path and to walk a path, and we walk in that path that we're aligned to, you find peace, you find prosperity, you do find challenges and growth. I mean, without there's still, it's not like it's all rainy day
Right.
rosy goggles, right? Like, you'll grow and stuff, but the growth that you experience will always lead you further in the development of what it is you're truly passionate about. And I find, like, the work that I do is I it seems to me that a lot of people have their path given to them. Someone tells them, like, hey, this is the path you should do. You should go be a doctor, or you should go be a
That's right.
lawyer, or you should go do this, or everybody goes to this. You should get good grades. Like, everybody's given these pathways, and those pathways we're given are meant to be helpful to us. They're meant to prepare us for success. They're not meant to do us any damage. But sometimes we find out along those paths that we're like, why are we walking this path? And there's this, like, inflection point where people, they realize they're not on their path, right? They're not walking
Hmm.
it, but they don't feel like they can change directions because they know the path they're on. And my core belief, my foundational belief, right, is that we all have, a path that's we're meant for. It's something that really drives us. And
Right.
the pursuit of that pathway is the pursuit to our highest prosperity, our highest joy, our greatest success, our most honorable achievement. Like, whatever we're going to bring significantly into the world, it's somewhere down this self-ordained, prescribed path. But we have to honor ourselves to get there, and that seems to take a practice of developing virtues and beliefs and coming into full awareness of yourself,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, virtue is definitely one of the ways that we get there. Subscribing to a higher, uh, set of norms and things, characteristics that we can follow to be our best, and to get into our alignment to find our path, the path. most suited for our mission, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you use the example of folks that have their life prescribed for them. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an engineer because this is good for you. This is, we have your best interests at heart. Um,
Yeah.
but then if that is a field that doesn't have a kind of harmonic resonance with your fundamental self, because we talk about foundational or core beliefs. I have something similar, which is that every mind is a unique fingerprint. No two minds are truly, in the history of the humans that have been born, no two
Right.
humans ever are going to have the same fingerprint. It's a unique spark with a unique, you know, place on the light spectrum that will never be
Yeah.
seen again, along the lines, said in a different way to how you phrased it. Uh, and so,
Like, and
you
even
know,
twins, like twins,
exactly,
two genetically identical people or nearly identical people.
but
I
not
agree with
truly
you.
identical. Yeah.
Yeah, their minds and their experience of life is going to be different. They're going to be
And
unique.
so it,
Yeah.
and so when you prescribe a life to a person, if that doesn't have that resonance down to the foundation, then that, of course, is going to cause, all sorts of, you know, hidden problems, or explicit, overt, issues, maybe alcoholism, unhappiness, you
Yeah.
name it, whatever. And so to your point, the people who are the happiest warriors in life, who wake up every day, just can't wait to tackle their trade, whatever it is, are the ones for which every daily ritual, every habit or custom, every rule or policy they have, their virtues, the values, and then the foundational beliefs, everything is lined up in perfect order. It all
Totally.
strengthens each tier from the core to their daily activities and their choices and judgments that all reinforce each other. They interlock to create a much more powerful whole as a person because they are fully aligned, right? And so you have these
Yeah.
two examples of a person who's living someone else's dream and someone else's personality versus someone who is fully integrated. They are an integrated human being.
Well,
Yeah.
I
But
actually just have a really quick question for you, Greg.
Yeah.
When you were, in the training, did you find that any of like your core like foundational beliefs conflicted with any of the virtues of the samurai or like your training while you were there? Or did you find like it all
Yeah.
pretty synced up pretty well?
Yeah. So I would have to say that being an American, Japanese society even today, it may be modern, but it's still very hierarchical,
Yeah.
right? And even the language that one uses, um, so in the Japanese language, um, the verbs and even nouns that you use, you have to modify or wholly replace and change based on whether you're talking to someone who is your superior or senpai versus
Hmm.
someone who is your social equal versus someone who is your social inferior or kohai. And so that is how kind of modernly feudalistic Japan still is, right? Because it very much like senior social hierarchy, and whether that's age, whether that's organizational power, has always been fundamental to Japanese history, and the samurai even more so. And so um in the dojo, I if I was 5 years into the school and someone just joined, I was the senpai, I was the superior. And they would use honorifics more towards me, and I would use very casual speak to them. And so, you know, as an American, when you are raised that, we're all equal, we treat each other equal, like, you know, groveling and sniveling and stuff to somebody just because they happen to be a chief vice president versus a janitor is obnoxious and etc. Uh, that was one that I did come to terms with it because it's just what it is. But it was always one where I had to live a split personality, right? And in the corporate world too in Japan, because I would have to use honorifics to customers on customer visits, etc. And bow lower and all of that. And so that was one that was always a struggle. I mean, I understood it, and it's like, look, no one asked me to come to Japan, right? So it's like, like me expecting the society to change, it's just not going to happen. So I had to accept it as that is the culture.
Yeah, and you had
So
to do
that
a
was
lot.
a
I
good
mean,
example.
yeah, you talked about like all the things you had to do to get there too, right? You had to know
Yes.
Japanese and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you definitely pursued that. So it makes sense, like right in that space to honor those customs. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we have to understand too, like about this interesting walk and like for me, like the foundational belief, we all have our path, is understand that, you have to respect the path that other people are on. And if you are in the place where they're all in there doing, what is theirs to do, like, respect that and say, okay, this is how
Right.
they do it. And I'm going to honor that and allow them their space because, I walk my path, but that doesn't mean that I need to take my path and force it on anyone else.
Right. And also it did change me. I am still an American by birthright. But at least at this point lived, a little more than half my life here. But a little more than half my adult life. But I also learned from that, right? At first it chafed and I was like, this is BS. Everyone's equal. Why do I have to grovel like this? But at the same time, the more you do it, the more you start to think, well, is there more to this? And I would say that in some sense, I did start to think that, well, you know, in Japan, they call it, what do they call it? Ancestor worship, but it's a terrible phrase because they don't worship their ancestors. They pay homage to them.
Yeah.
Ancestor homage is the right phrase that I don't hear much, which is that in Japan, and this is topical to the trip that I just took, that the original reason for the reason was that my sword master of that school, a very famous teacher, Risuke Otake, had passed away a few years back, and I didn't was not there, could not go to the funeral. And although I had retired quite a while ago, for various reasons, um, I felt like I needed to go pay homage or respect. And so the day after I arrived in Narita Airport, he lived his whole life in Narita, just so happens his dojo was there and so forth. And so the next day I took a taxi out to the the Buddhist kind of plot where his family grave is. So you're not buried individually. You're cremated, and then a portion of your ashes are combined with those of the rest of your entire lineage or family, right? And so
Oh, wow.
there's an otake plot. And so I had to go there. You wash off because, leaves, and people give flowers and put them in the little metal cups, and then you burn incense, but the flowers will fall off and then they'll fall on the grave, and then the weather will come, and then the flowers stick on the granite of the grave, and it just gets messy. And so one of the first things that you do when you go to the grave is you wash it off. They have these little, you know, buckets, and then you go and you scrub the grave. You clean it off when you visit, and you put flowers and incense, and you pay homage, right?
Wow, that's
And so,
beautiful.
you're right. And so, that is because of reverence, right?
Yeah.
not necessarily worship. Worship is not the right word. It's reverence, it's gratitude, it's thankfulness. And so, uh, you know, I was incredibly grateful as a one of the few foreigners, at least back then, to have ever been admitted. I was at the time in '99. I think I was only like the fourth foreigner, fifth to be admitted. A very famous person, Don Drager, a very famous American martial artist and ex-Marine from World War II, was the trailblazer there, right? And then I was in that line of foreigners who had been given the honor to be accepted into this ancient art. So I was incredibly grateful. But back to the point about seniority and changing verbs, I did over time start to realize that, well, part of this isn't just groveling and cold hierarchy. Part of it is that the people that are older, things are here today. None of us is perfect. Uh, I don't believe in ahistorical kind of critique. Different people and ages are under different challenges, different rules, different assumptions, and so forth. And so part of that respect that they pay to the elders is because part of the reason things are here is because of those elders and then the people
Right.
before them and the people before them. And so could things be perfect? Yes. Do people get things wrong? Yes. But if you always live in that critique side of the world, um, it's a dismal place. And you will be judged as harshly when you get older by the next generation
Yeah.
as you're judging others. And so part of it is also a function of gratitude.
Yeah.
When you go to the grave, you're expressing gratitude. When you use honorifics with someone who's older, maybe you don't personally know them and they've done nothing for you, but they've done something for somebody in their life and in the larger society. And so to the point about being American and did I ever have something that graded me? That graded me very early on. But then over time, I started to, I wouldn't, not a total conversion. I like being back here and, and being able to just address people plainly and not change my verbs and stuff. But I did learn lessons. I wasn't going into it with a closed mind.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, man. I love that. And like, it's you were practicing virtues, right? And
Yes.
there's so much there. Like I think sometimes like what do I if what do I want to accomplish in life? If I really felt like what is my life goal? And it's interesting that you bring this up about kind of the ceremonial, the gratitude and the honoring. I've always thought that I want to be the kind of person and I hope to and aspire to that when I pass, that many people will show up and they will be
Yes.
thankful and they will appreciate the life that I live. And I don't want them to necessarily be sad that I'm gone. I would love that they would honor, that they would come and say, "Hey, look, you were a good person on this world, and we show up here to be grateful and be thankful that you were here, and hope that wherever you are now, you are in, the great halls of Valhalla or whatever it is." You know what I mean? And like, you're living a great, you're living a life. And so, the beautiful part like about that is one is yeah, I hear like the respect of going up there and cleaning the grave, but it also is this kind of perpetual demonstration. Anybody that sees you doing that, or someone that shows up the next day and sees the grave, the site clean, they'll know that someone was there and that someone did do that, and
And this
it's
person mattered.
and this person mattered. And I think that it's kind of that message that we can carry on and demonstrate through our actions to other people is that you can live a life that matters. And I want to believe we can all live a life that matters. We all do and should live lives that matter. And and I think that this kind of brings up at the core of it this notion of virtues. How do you live a life that matters? And it seems like I feel like my guess here is that virtue is at the core of this. It's right. It's like understanding what virtues are important to you and how to practice and develop those virtues. So I'd like to, if you're interested, like, want to dig in maybe a little bit on some individual virtues, like, are there virtues for you, Greg, that stand out that you feel are like kind of more important or more personal? Not to stack rank them and say the greatest of all virtue is this, but like, what matters to you, and like,
Right.
how do you see that virtue important? Are you good with
Well,
that?
yeah, I'm cognizant that I didn't answer one of your questions,
Oh,
which was what do I define virtue as?
yeah.
Uh, and so I guess let's kind of start there, and then that'll segue into sort of like what I consider for me some of the higher ones, because it also touches on this cosmos of virtues that I've personally developed for myself. This sort of constellation, and then
Yeah, that sounds
why
perfect.
have I picked some over others? And so like when we say virtue, really, you know, there's the clinical definition of virtue. So if you were to go onto ChatGPT or Google and type in, what is virtue, what you'll get is, it's a quality of moral excellence, right? That a person demonstrates. And and so one of the key ingredients of a virtue is that it's a moral excellence. It's a behavior or a quality that represents an ideal, right? And it's a habit, meaning that when you say that someone has a virtue, like let's just say gratitude or gentleness or adaptability, whatever it is, what you're also saying is that this person just doesn't just demonstrate this thing a couple times or intermittently, right? It's stable. Like they demonstrate it repeatedly, consistently in all sorts of scenarios under stress, not under stress, etc. Right? So
Yeah,
there's a moral, ideal or excellence attached to it. It's a habit. It's repeatable. It's stable, and also that it's balanced, right? And that if you have folks that are, are really virtuous in terms of humanity and temperance, but maybe they're not so much on conviction or wisdom or something else. If they're imbalanced, well, those virtues, if they're over calibrated or over functioning, can not necessarily become a vice, but they can become a weakness. And so
yes.
another aspect of it is that the virtues are balanced to where they make each other stronger. They interlock, like I was talking about earlier, to make the whole far more powerful than any individual virtue, right? And so that's kind of the way I see the conventional definition. And then my expanded definition on top of that is that yes, those are all true, but I see virtue as a bridge. Um, when we use these terms like humanity, wisdom, conviction, duty, intelligence, and temperance, which are my big six around which these smaller virtues orbit, um, what we're doing is we're going from that foundational belief, like you said, I believe that every person has a unique path, and then I said that every person has a unique fingerprint or a light spectrum, and that no two will ever be the same, right?
Right.
And then we take that and say, well, what does that mean? So what do I do with that, right? And so in my
Yeah.
case, it means that I believe that every person has absolute autonomy and dignity, for example, right? And that's
Yeah.
a value that's premised on that foundational belief. And so, well, what do I do with that? Well, I have to take that value and for me to be able to make progress, for me to be able to hold myself accountable to that value or that belief and say, well, how am I going to know when I'm doing it? How am I going to know when I'm embodying it or expressing it versus when I'm not? Right? Then you need to tie that, you need to chain it to behaviors, right? And like actions, habits, rituals, customs, rules, that you use for judgment, right? So that a person can say that person is acting whatever, with charity, with discretion, with whatever. You need to be able to bucketize that or bind it, right? Tether it. And so for me, the definition of virtue, it's the bridge. It is the bridge between those theoretical values that we're in beliefs that we're talking about. I believe in this, I believe in that, to and therefore I have a rule that says, X, Y, or Z. And so it is that bridge down to those actual observable, falsifiable actions in a person where you can say they're acting with bravery versus they're acting with cowardice. And so them in and of themselves, I don't consider effective. You have to have for a virtue to be effective, you have to have those underlying beliefs, right? And values. And
Yeah.
then you have to have the tethering of a virtues and saying, these are my virtues and I express them in these ways. And when I make a judgment, these are the rules and policies to express that virtue that I will make. And if I would give an example, I can give, for example, an example of going from a foundational belief to, say, a ritual. Like, how do we map that out really quickly, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's start with, say, in my case, virtue is the highest good. That's a foundational belief. Virtue and its pursuit and consistent embodiment in my actions is the highest good or purpose to my life. Okay, well, what's the set of values above that? Well, a first value is that success in refining my character is contingent on defining the virtues I believe in and developing rules, guidelines, etc., that will keep me consistent with those virtues, right?
Yeah.
And then, within my set of virtues, I consider wisdom to be the highest of the virtues. And we'll get into that later in terms of your original question, in terms of what do I feel are the most important. And then within wisdom, within the seven sub virtues that I've laid out for wisdom, discernment, etc., I considered nobility as the highest of all of them. And the reason being because wisdom's not possible without a commitment to a higher set of ideals than hedonism, status, power, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So we keep drilling down, and then I say, okay, well, I've defined my virtues, nobility, number one, but also within that wisdom is in its little orbit of sub virtues for me, help me to pursue virtue as the highest good. Well, okay,
Yeah.
fine, great. What does that really mean? So when do I know, Greg, when you're being noble or whatever? Okay, well, a rule I have is I must regularly commit myself to pursue virtue as the highest goal above material wealth, fame, and hedonism, and associate each virtue to a set of rules, customs. And so a habit that I have, so now we're going up the chain, right? We've gone from foundational belief to a set of values to the virtues that support those, a set of rules that I must always pursue virtue above all other aims, including material wealth. Okay, well, what's next? A habit or something to demonstrate. Shane knows that I carry this little leather pouch around with me. And in there is a set of beads. Um, and those beads are the 42 virtues, the six parent and then the subs. And I carry this around with me everywhere I go. It's in my bag or it's hooked on my belt. And the final link to that ritual, right? I cycle through these beads every morning. And then as I'm cycling through them, I call them out by name. And then I define two or three that I want to work on for that day that I think where I'm falling short. And then at the end of the day, I'll cycle through it and then hold myself accountable. And how did I do that day? Was I true to these things? Did I falter? Where can I go, be different? And so we would talk about like this whole scaffolding or infrastructure. If you were to do this on a grand scale, over and over again in terms of a foundational belief, and then all these splinter virtues, they branch out, right? And branch further and branch. You would have a religion. Like that is
Yeah.
basically how you step through to build a religion like Catholicism or Islam or Taoism is you're basically mapping from basic beliefs down to uh, the nitty gritty, the actions that you are allowed to take and not take, the rituals and customs that you follow, the habits that you form in terms of wake up at each time at 6 a.m. and prostrate in front of, the sun or a tree and chant a hymn. You basically reverse engineered a belief system. And
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
virtue is that bridge, that tether that says, okay, theory is great. Now, where does the rubber meet the road here? Like, how am I going to know that I'm on mission versus I'm not, right? And that's basically my conception of virtue. It's good, it's important, but it is a single link or chain in this larger framework that you have to do the work below it, and to some degree you have to do the work above it for it to really all lock in, like that resonant integrated human being that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So, what, let me, so much of what you're saying is fascinating and interesting to me. And, it even helps me understand the work that I do in a different
Mm,
way, because I haven't always, I definitely have not been articulating it or putting it in the context that you did. But like, I realize, like, the work, the find your path work I do, I teach people, like, first let's get our orientation and direction. Where are we and where are we going, right? And then
mhm.
let's talk about growth and change and understand that to get from where we are to where we want to go, change will need to occur, and we need to understand what growth looks like so that we can
Yes.
foster and develop the growth, right? And then the next layer is support and resistance. Understand what things do benefit the growth and what things create challenges and things that you need to overcome, or gives you the strength, because resistance builds strength, and we need resistance, but we also need our
Yes.
support, and to
Hmm.
manage the balance between those two, right? And then the fourth stage and kind of final stage is momentum and frequency, which, to your point, is that's where I teach people, like, okay, now that we understand what this thing is, that we want to grow, we know what growth looks like, we know what's helping us, we know what our challenges are, what is our practice? How do we put this into
Yes,
practice into a daily way? And I do it through momentum
exactly.
and frequency. So we
Hmm.
want to increase the momentum of this thing in our life by increasing how frequently we partake in it and how it shows up. So we work on developing habits. And so what's interesting is the whole process you just described is exactly the process that I take people through, right? We reverse engineer, like, look, if you want to be this thing, whatever is at your path, whatever you decide that you want to be, if you want to become that thing, let's reverse engineer the ideas, the beliefs, the thoughts, and now I can say the virtues and values, right? Would embody the person that's fully manifested as that thing that you want to become. And let's start integrating those right now and kind of almost develop, in a sense, your own personal religion about how you want to be, or how to believe you can be what you want to be.
Right. They're
Yeah.
really just boundaries or buckets, if you will, with a definition, a behavioral definition that allows you to. They're shorthand, right?
Yeah.
Which is why people who belong to the same religion or philosophy or whatever, when they talk about, every religion's going to have definitions, like say the Catholic Church or whoever will
Right.
have definitions of these virtues. They'll say, that courage is this and faith is that, blah, blah, blah. And so it creates a shorthand for those people to talk about these things and also to hold each other accountable, right?
Mm.
And so it really is just this tethering, bucketizing thing that in and of itself is sounds great. Yeah, awesome. But if it doesn't get bounded um, to behaviors and disciplines and practices, then what does it really mean, right? Um,
Right. Yeah.
to your point, and so yeah, that for anyone to build that, that's basically I'd done all this comparative religion study. A guy named Houston Smith read all sorts of books on internet studies on like what are the components of religions and stuff. Like I spent years just obsessed with this question because no
Yeah.
religion I found really, I always had issues with, you know, with a lot of them to the point where I gave up and I'm like, you know what, I'll just have to go my own. And so where do I start? And so yeah, I
I,
think most people to some degree are going to have to go through that. They're going to have to feel their way through something similar. Maybe not the same framework that I have or that you have, but they're going to have to do something similar. They're going to have to go from pie in the sky theory and ideals to
and find
behavior.
yeah.
virtue in some of the systems that are out there, as you have, very specific, you know Clint, we're talking the other day, and you had mentioned that you took a lot from like Dr. Joe Dispenza and stuff like that, and stuff that resonated with you. But kind of back what we were talking about earlier, like that's what we have to do. We have to follow our moral code given to us and take the best that we can from all the different sources and align that on an individual level, these things that form our character, and then use that, and then be able to go out to, our, there's a common denominator there that of things that people are looking for in, religions and stuff like that, that
They
is
are.
fundamental to all of our experiences. You know what I'm saying? So
People are thirsting for this stuff, yes.
yeah, and just because, like, maybe you abandon institutionalized religion because of the specificity or whatever, but there's still these things that, as a human being alive, that you still have to adhere to, kind of like self-actualize, or move towards your highest uh, good, and your purpose and your meaning.
And I
Yeah.
see the grasping for this as uh, I see it more and more. I was just listening to a podcast called Modern Wisdom by a guy named Chris Williams. Um, and he had Jordan Peterson on several weeks or months back. And
Yeah, I
Peterson,
like.
this famous guy, he's written the 12 Rules, right?
Yep.
He wrote a book long ago about the maps of meaning, Jungian archetypes, and so forth. I've been observing Jordan Peterson sniffing around this stuff along, over quite a few, discussions and so forth. And, he had his rules for life. So we're talking about that rules layer, that we, just one layer above virtue, rules and habits, customs, rituals, actions, and recently he's been delving into, in this podcast recently, he didn't name it that, but he was touching on core or foundational beliefs. And so, even folks like Peterson are wrestling. I can see everyone trying to wrestle with this landscape, this terrain. And it's fascinating being somebody who's obsessed on this stuff for like 20 years to, and created his own little schema or like thing, to see everyone, more and more people
It's
trying to wrestle with
fundamental.
this thing to piece together a picture of something. Everyone's seems to be thirsting for this more and more, and more
It's
people are
fundamental.
talking about these topics.
Yeah, it's common denominator between us all. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
These things.
Yep. The
And
human
it's
psyche. Yeah.
and it's
Needs it.
something that I think has, like, it's slipped out of culture. We have this amazing ability in our body called tolerance, right? That as we are exposed to something, we become tolerant of it. So if there, like, for example, like when I was young, I was told we hand washed our dishes, right? And I was told I needed to use the hottest water possible to really get the dishes clean. So I had to build up a tolerance to having
Right.
my hands in hot water, and I would do this by holding my hands in the hot water. And after a while, like, I realized I got to where it just really didn't matter, like
That's
Wim
right.
Hof and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes this can work against us if we're not careful. We can get so used to a good thing that we become unaware that it is present with us, and it can slip away. And it's then when it slips away that we really start to appreciate the value of that thing being there with us. And I think
Absolutely.
I think what's happened is we're starting to see this, as we've been exposed to people across social media. Everybody's got a voice. We're hearing what everybody's saying. Humanity got a big mirror shined back on itself with social media. Basically, we as the world said to ourselves, this is what we look like. And we're like, holy crap. What? Like, and so, we've tried to find peace and order out of this. And we realize that there's people around the world in all these different religions and beliefs and countries, but yet when you really get the opportunity to hear from them and see them and connect them, that you realize they're humans just like you too. And it kind of blows your mind, because there may have been these ideas that were presented to you when you were young that, because they're not us, they are them, and us is better than them, or us is different than them, or them is dangerous and us is safe, right? And so we create these kind of deep unconscious subconscious lines, and then those lines become broken.
Yes.
And then after all that breaks down, all those ideas, and kind of structures are broke down. We want structure because structure enables us to grow and be strong and do well, but we also want freedom, right? And so if we feel like our structure provides us freedom, then our structure is usually supported by us, whatever it is. If our structures are elevating us and lifting us, but now, we want those common structures like between us. What is that? And I think you're right. I've even seen in the evolution of Joe Dispenza's work when I was first, going and mentoring under him, he would talk a lot about the mind, and kind of getting energy to the mind and stuff. And I was thinking, it was fascinating to me that he was teaching meditation, but he was doing it really, really from a logical perspective. And I'm like, I wonder if he's ever going to consider the heart and the neuro body inside the heart and the way you can kind of think from there and reconnecting to that center, of life and stuff. And it was interesting because in the years that I followed him, that's exactly how his message has changed.
Right.
Right now, he talks more about the heart mind connection, and he talks about getting into the heart and unlocking the power of your heart. And like you're right, you can see this evolution occurring across many people out there, right? They're starting to talk about there's something different. It's like we've all, it was there and then it was gone, and none of us understand. We're like, wait, something was here and I don't know what it was, and I can't quite put my thumb on it, but something's missing. And so everyone's kind of looking, we're going, where's that thing? What's
Right.
that thing that
What's
connects
that
us?
superstructure that we used to always have defined for us and could stabilize us psychologically that has been absent, and we're trying to
Yeah.
grasp around like blind men and women to
Yeah,
figure out how to piece it together.
and it feels chaotic, it feels messy, but I'll be honest, and this is just my take on it, and this again comes from my virtues and my core beliefs. Is I think in a way it's kind of beautiful because
Mm,
I see humanity at this developmental point where we as a population, a species on the planet, are more aware of the fact that we are a species on a planet than we have ever been, as far as I can tell, in recorded history. And, I think that we know that there's really nowhere else to go. If we just keep conquering lands, like we're just changing owners and title deeds, like what does it matter? What is the next step of evolution for us? Is that the ability to go and live off planet? And how do we do this? And so, that's why, like, I love this kind of introspection. It's why we do this podcast, is to, just kind of continue these conversations. Like, we're searching for this thing. We all
right.
want our peace and our happiness, and we want, these values. And um, time and time again, and I love the way that you brought this up and just the story that you've expressed, because it demonstrates that we need to, it feels like, I'll say it this way, because I don't want to tell anybody what they need to do, right? But I feel like the pursuit of developing these virtues, of doing exactly what you're saying, understanding what are your core beliefs and where are you wanting to go and what is important to you, and then how do you put that into your daily life
Yeah,
practices, because that's how I think we create the new thing that was now missing. Because what's missing, I don't think it's so much that it's missing, it's that we've outgrown what we had before, and we need to develop. We as a current generation need to start kind of building the structures again. Like
Right.
how do we function as a human race on the whole
Well,
planet?
if one looks at the 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 messy history of most, world religions, uh, aside from the public relations literature, you'll see that the majority of these religions had incredibly messy, uh, heterogeneous pathways. Where, like, if like we're from Christendom, so let's use Christendom as an example,
Yeah,
right? There was not, even today, of course, there's not a single Christianity, or
right. There's like
we
500 different versions.
right. And if one says, well, we've splintered, well, there wasn't even one Catholic Church, right? And then, of course, even back in the medieval age, we had the we had the Eastern Orthodox that went back just as old
Yeah,
to as the Catholic uh, a church. But then the formation of Catholicism was basically an arm bending, that happened very early in the century, where they basically there were all these cults and smaller religions. There were countless little mini religions of Christianity, churches and so forth, to where the Catholic power base basically said we're going to come together and basically define the doctrine, and then we're going to expunge other doctrines from these countless dozens of offshoots and groups that we don't agree with. So even
Yeah.
in the early part of Christianity, it was not homogenous. It was very splintered, diverse, etc., right? And and so to your point about all sorts of people are struggling and trying and grasping, that's part and parcel of a bunch of people's dealing with situations and struggles in a period of time that they share, and they're all trying to grasp and piece together new belief systems, and some will have more stickiness or strength than others, and others will fall by the wayside. But I do think that, and it's funny because Bill Gates said this the other day, with AI coming, we're going to need some sort of new world religion to keep us from losing our minds. And to a degree, I
Yeah.
think he's right there. I think
So,
we're searching for something. We don't know quite what it is, but everyone's starting to throw stuff out there to see what sticks and see what has resonance, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
we have like this is something that nobody is going to do for us, and if we just blindly trust people to, do it for us, then we're not going to have something organic to our own experience. And my like how I kind of look at it is like, there was a dark ages at one point, and whatever truth, and they just burned the books or whatever. And then fast forward to now, it's kind of like still the dark ages, but in a different way. Like the truth is so hard to find. It's just so much viral, just information flooding that,
Noise
you
in the
know,
system. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like Henry David Thoreau said, by piling all the greatest books of all the greatest cultures and religions and minds ever written, one on top of each other, that's the closest that you can get to it. And in a Carl Jung kind of way, like you know, the the and Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, all of it is basically saying the same thing anyway. So the truth that we're trying to find now in the second dark ages or whatever, it's kind of the virtues and stuff from all of that's ever existed and exists now, um, and extracting those fundamental. It's almost like we're going backwards, like in a way, like you know. So the Dark Ages, my analogy to me, I uh, realized that the thing that I've been looking for, all this information that I've been looking for the whole time, besides having conversations like this and extracting good ideas through art and other beautiful sources, um, everything that I've been looking for the whole time is already inside me, you know? And so instead of having to, uh, you know, just follow other, you know, systems or whatever schools of thought, like extract the best from them, but really kind of lean inside my own self. Like we don't need the middleman to interact with the creator, and we don't need nobody else is going to come save the day for us. We have to save the day ourselves, and we have to have a moral code or constitution that we ascribe to ourselves to on an individual level get to the highest ground that we can, and by being that example and being that contribution to creation, I feel like that's how we, I don't know, get there.
Yeah, Ralph Waldo Emerson has a quote. You mentioned Thoreau, so I'll throw Emerson in there too.
My favorite writer of all.
He has a
Poet
quote that
Desmond.
says, men imagine that they communicate with their virtue or vice only by overt actions, and do not see that virtue or vice emit a breath every moment, right? And
Yeah.
so, the crux of that being that, we talk about all these beliefs and values and so forth. Um, but really, the value of any given person's belief system, um, or and the pull or the power of that system to be felt by the people around them, to where others say, you know, I don't know, there's something about that person, or that person, I really admire them, or whatnot. Like, it's all going to be demonstrated by, their every little action. Like, if
Yeah.
we've all been in, places where any organization, be it a church or, a corporate environment, whatever, where, they say that, these are our beliefs, these are our values, these are our foundational beliefs. But then the small actions very much run counter to those things, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so the people that we emulate, the people that we aspire to be like, are those people for which um, every little action, every little motion, every little intonation, is saturated with those values that they say they believe in. We say how they walk the talk, right? But it's more than that. They don't just walk it, they breathe it, they emanate it, right? And so I think that, to the conversation around, lots of people are feeling their way through. This is becoming a more and more common topic for podcasters and social, famous types and so forth. And that, these pathways to get there, are very messy. All sorts of people are trying different things. I think it all ties together in the sense that whatever path, whatever that new religion will be, or sets of religions, they're going to be because they really resonate down to the very core with people, and they're like, this this is that's who I want to be. That's who I am. That whole, that is going to bring me whatever, peace, tranquility, happiness, uh, you name it. And so it's okay for this to be one grand experiment, I think, because the best
Yeah.
ideas, the best beliefs, the best rituals, customs will all kind of merge eventually and find their way into
The
something,
best.
I think.
Yeah, the best of all of them. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
if you look, like, I love looking at, anthropology, archaeology, studies of civilizations through the past. And,
Mm.
I don't consider myself an expert on anyone. I'm an avid observer of a lot of things. I find it all interesting, so I just kind of, take it all in. But things, I've noticed is that these cultures, these beliefs and traditions, right? They develop very functionally, right? Like, this is how
Yes.
we need to operate as a society. So we're going to start doing these things. And then, we continue to practice these virtues so that when generations come that weren't here to experience the trauma that led us to the development of this mechanism, right?
Right, right,
They can continue on, and they can have a principle, a guidepost to hold to, that will allow them to not repeat the mistakes that we made. And
right.
so, and that is kind of the birth of religions and civilizations, and as they grow. And, there's what happens is there's this point where sometimes it kind of starts to become misused, or you're
Hmm.
so far away from the what originated the purpose of it, that the function of it, just carrying out the ritual, without any knowledge, to your point, like what you were saying, like why you kneel down, why you put your sword 2 feet away, like all that stuff, without understanding
Exactly.
the core of it. It's just kind of meaningless action, right? And,
Yes.
and that's what I think, a bit of this is this, as we have to realize that I believe that we all have this inside us. We're just not always kind of aware of it. We have enough systems in place that we become very tolerant to the need and purpose. It serves the function. But now that the systems are kind of, breaking down, or, we're hitting this point where it's not quite working, we have to kind of start, in my mind, with functionally what works. Well, you know, let's think about what we know. If we start thinking about what could the future look like, right? We need to come up with something that's compatible, right? Something that allows independent and individual sovereignty for people, so that you can practice the way you want to practice. You can speak the language you want to speak. You can, use the ideology that you want to use that develops you forward into your highest potential. But that should not aggressively or offensively block my ability to do so, nor should I be aggressively or offensively blocking your ability to do so. So
I
it's
mean, it's
there's compatibility, but also giving each other space, right? And that's the challenge I feel like we've got to figure out is how do we accept each other as we are and allow ourselves to coexist, right?
these are the things that we're looking for that we knew when we were 5 years old and we were taught in kindergarten, and that these are the things that aren't taught in college. And sometimes where between there we forgot all of these things, right? And so we have to. Uh, it starts with the individual. The systems and the institutions and everything fall because the individuals don't have these things in them that are critical to our not only our well-being but to to our highest version, our fulfillment of the highest version. And so I mean, I think that there's a personal responsibility to just keep it simple and root yourself in um and these things that are unavoidable through life. And when we do these things, when we adhere to our constitution inside of us and we keep building to it and making it better, then in a weird way, like, you know, we become self-reliant and less dependent on these other systems and societies or whatever that might not be ideal or whatever, or because they're could be led by people that are corrupted or whatever. I'm saying, at the end of the day, it always is going to come back to the individual, and the whole is going to be best by all the individuals being their best.
I'll be the tiebreaker and say that it's both.
Yeah, yeah.
That the individual, and then on a cultural level, right? Like we as individuals live in communities, which live in, in our case, counties, states, nation states, etc. Um, and you know, there are different demands at different scales. And so to your point, Clint, if we're talking civilizationally, right?
Yeah.
Uh, let's just say the United States. There's the first sociologist and the credited sociologist um, is a was an Islamic scholar, Ibn Khaldun. Um, he wrote a very long set of histories of some of the caliphates as well as the Greeks and so forth. But um, and then he wrote a book that kind of encapsulated a lot of his core beliefs. But one of the beliefs was something called asabiya, right? And his question was, you know, having watched caliphates rise and fall, having seen the Greeks rise and fall, these civilizations that come, they expand, and then they start to wither. Like you know, what what was that essence, right? Like that
Yeah.
they had that made them grow and become formidable and be able to impose will, and then what caused them to start to wither or crack and then fall apart, right?
Yeah.
And it
I think the erosion of the individual has something to do with that, the not having
uh
principle.
it was so his concept of asabiya is unity of will, is kind of one interpretation of it. But
Yeah.
basically that the civilizations that could stand against the challenges of other nations and the internal and external stressors, environmental, you name it, were the ones that had the strongest unity of will. Now, in his case, he looked at the desert nomad tribes that had long survived for, centuries as all these caliphates rose and fall and the Greeks and stuff. He was studying these nomadic tribes and like they are so stable in their sense, right? And so what is it about them? And it's just like had this unity of purpose and will, because they had this underlying subset of foundational beliefs that were rock solid, right? That didn't mean that they were calcified and sort of inflexible, because nomadic desert tribes, it's all about flexibility. Like nature
Yeah.
is going to throw lots of stuff at you and you better adapt, right?
Yeah.
And so it was that there was this core that was in unbreakable, right? These basic beliefs. And so his
Yeah.
synopsis was that the Romans, the reason that they became what they became, or the Greeks or the states, or whatever, is that there were these foundational beliefs that they you know they never once doubted, right? There's a quote by Victor Hugo. I like quotes, but anyway, it says, "Change your opinions, keep to your principles. Change your leaves, keep intact." Right? And so that is kind of the essence of this unity of will, or asabiya, which is that for a civilization or a group to be a group, there have to be these underlying core foundational beliefs that we then branch out from. Now, the different positions or opinions, science informs this, economics informs that, blah, 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 blah. But that core, for a society's social fabric to stay intact, a core has to be stable and be there, that people are like, this isn't viable, or the center can't hold, right? And so I think that, to your question about people are striving for the stuff, they're looking for some structure, they're looking for answers, guidance, beacons, of light, something to follow. I think it's both civilizationally, that we don't, the religions have gone away, and, they just didn't adapt. They became rigid and etc.
Yeah.
And that we're also going through social acceleration, right? Social acceleration with technology. So the lack of that structure, the lack of that underpinning structure or core, those connections with people, etc. It's already causing depression, anxiety, uh, you know, increased strife, violence, etc. All these bad things when, a social fabric starts to tear. But the social acceleration of technology is you know uh, really, what shall I say, force multiplying that effect, right?
Yeah, it's ramping it
Everything's
up a
moving
lot.
so fast, everything's changing so fast. The fashions, the words, things that used to change over 10 years or 100 years are now changing in 2 months. And I think this combination of things, the lack of a core structure to ground you, to anchor you, plus the increased acceleration of everything, I believe that is at the root of people grasping, almost in a panicked state, to try to find answers, to find something that can ground them, to not get vertigo from all this stuff that's happening. So I think it's
Yeah.
both. I think individuals are looking for something, and they have a part of it to give, to contribute to, but I also think that they can't do it on their own. They don't have the words, they don't have the structures. They're looking for guidance, right? I think it's both, and at a civilizational level and an individual level, the absence of these things is, in large part, I think, explains a lot of the societal sort of tensions and other things that we're starting to see.
No,
Well,
I
yeah,
agree.
I mean, we definitely we struggle just as a species, I think, with the unknown a bit. Like I
Yeah,
watch my
yeah,
kids, like, when we do something simple, like change them from a crib to a bed, they're it was stressful for them, and so I
yeah.
used to sit down and we'd go have this kind of little practice. We'd go, okay, look, what's different? Okay, we see what's different, but what's the same? Like, well, you still have the same walls, everything else is the same. And it was interesting if I could ground them into what was still the same. The small change, the singular change became easier to accept, right? And this is
Exactly.
just kind of
Exactly.
natural in us, right? And so, you know, it may be that we could say that people don't have the language or the words um to express their self, but maybe they did, based on the words they learned as a child. But to your point, language is changing so fast that even if you knew how to express it 8, 9 years ago, you might not be able to express it in the same manner today and have the same result. Like, you have to kind of elevate that, and that, it can feel isolating and it can feel separating. People feel alone. Like, gosh, I'm trying to speak. I'm sending out this signal, but the reflection that I'm getting back, the feedback I'm getting back, isn't really even lining up to the signal that I'm sending out. So I'm misinterpreted. So I feel threatened and I feel, anxious and all this kind of stuff. So it's that lack of ability to get that reciprocal vibration, that connection, right?
And that's
But
why
I think
to Shane's point, to tie to the individual, and then that quote about Ralph Waldo Emerson, really people, I won't say this universalistically because there's, always want to hedge, but um, people know, like when it comes to a virtue or a character attribute, quality, whatever you want to call it, in a sense, to Shane's point, in terms of kindergarten playgrounds and stuff, you know it when you see it, right?
Yeah.
Like we know what kindness is versus,
yeah.
barbarity. We know what conviction versus apathy is, right? Generally, we may not be able to provide a really slick operational definition of it, but we can kind of it's sort of encoded in a sense. And so um the even if we don't have the language, like if people
So
can ground themselves in habits as individuals, if they can model it in the world and they can be true to it, and then they can express it even in a basic fashion to the people around them, like even taking a stance, you know, on these things when there's incentives to do the opposite
yeah,
will raise eyebrows to people around you. They'll people like, wait, that guy could have screwed his colleague and gotten that promotion, but he decided not to. Like, what's up with that, right? Um, you know, taking, these stances of, even if you don't have a framework or, a fancy religion or whatever, is something anyone can do. Like sitting down and saying, what do I truly believe in and how will I express that?
and
You
be
don't have
that
to be a
person.
philosophy major to be able to write
Yeah.
a 200-page thesis on your belief system and how these are all the rituals and customs and rules that I'll follow. You don't have to write out a religion. You could even like be good at one thing. Like if that one
Yeah.
thing, what's the highest prime foundational belief of all your beliefs, right? And then be good at that one thing. If think about that
Yeah.
one thing and how am I going to embody it every day of my life? If every person or even 25% of people were to think about that one thing, it would have a massive effect on society, and it would be all down to just basic behaviors. I'm going to smile when people say hello. I'm
Yeah.
going to open a door for everyone that I
Basics,
see, right?
Yeah.
chivalry, like good
Yeah.
You know,
manners.
it's interesting that you say that, Greg. I do this power word exercise with people, right? And I'll say, like, what are 3 goals you have in your life, right? And so, we'll talk about their goals and I'll say, okay, why do you want those goals? If you had that, like, what's the good feeling associated? How would it feel if you accomplished this goal? And so we come up with 3 distinct words, right? That, maybe it's freedom, security, love, whatever,
Hmm.
whatever these things are that they're currently craving, right? And then
Yep.
I take them through this guided meditation process to go from those 3 words, and I essentially walk them in through the future of, imagine your life if you had those things. And let's go
Hmm.
further, right? Let's kind of walk through those things developing in your life to the point that they are there, and then let's walk beyond that, and then
Mm,
let me know how you feel. And what I find in that space beyond the accomplishment of those goals, you start to find this virtuistic character. People be like, well, I'd feel really at ease, or I'd feel really powerful, or I'd feel radiant, or something like that, and so I use that as, like, well, that feeling, that state, in my belief, right, ties to their foundational belief. And so that's what I encourage them. I go, that's your power word, right?
it's
So
intent.
you should, if you can, spend at least 5 to 10 minutes a day at a minimum and just think on that thing, right? Just imagine
Yeah.
it, right? Just kind of go into it and go, if it's
Hold it.
honor, let's say, like, what does honor look like? How do I feel honor? When do I know what honor is? And just explore the concept of it for just a few minutes every day. And what's amazing is it starts to shift a person's behavior without you needing to tell them anything. Like I've watched
Yes.
people start to auto-correct themselves in the most effective ways, better than anyone could teach them or guide them or give them instructions to do. They will start to just kind of dial their own life in if they'll take the time to just tap into that one
And this
kind
is
of core thing.
this
Yeah,
is
go
why
ahead.
this is why my whole thing that it starts with the individual. Um, like Greg has the beads, and you have the word chart or whatever, and it's going into our life and our daily life and whatever with intent
Yes.
beforehand, strategically, and that is where I really think that we have to cling to that. What we can control and what we can do, our own mindset going into our lives. And then also, and this is crazy for me to say because I'm a poet, but we were talking about earlier about language. Like sometimes words get in the way, and this is where
Hmm.
art and analogy and metaphor and all these other things where we can communicate lofty ideals and thoughts and stuff like that beyond uh, vocabulary. Using indirectly communicate something powerful. Using metaphor or whatever. But I really believe that we have an, kind of a responsibility on an individual level to keep ourselves dialed into what our constitution aligns with and whom we are. And then, I'll always say this, and because when we shine on each other, we all grow. You know what I'm saying? And if we just shine and we be the example, I mean, at the end of our life, like beyond our net worth and our degrees and our job titles, whatever, we can't take any of that with us. But what it comes down to is who we are, which will be measured by our actions and time. I mean, action speaks and time tells who we are. And so if we stay at the core of who we are and be the example, be who we were meant to be, and what feels most right with us in our own lane, we're all equally valuable and awesome to each other and to the creation, to the whole. But we still have to like be our best version, and by that example, we can make the greatest impact, I believe, on the lives around us and moving forward, instead of like trying to control each other and say, hey, you're going to do this or you're going to do that or you should be doing this or that. No, like be the example of just awesomeness. Just be a person that's kind and that understands that we're all equal value to each other and to everyone.
Exactly. There are saints among us that don't even think about what they're doing. They don't have some fancy belief system. They don't have these fancy words. They don't have any fancy rituals and
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about like
and so forth. And yet they can, we've all met them before. They're as good a model of sagehood or sainthood or whatever you want to call them as, you know, some of the more famous people with fancy words and fancy belief systems and big titles and other things, to your point. Like it's people care, like if you have a fancy system or framework or whatever, but you don't model any of it, or you're incredibly inconsistent, you know, people it's not going to resonate or register with people because it's all
yeah,
about like are these things part of your very DNA or are they not, right? And to your point, you don't have to have the words and the charts and the mantras and
but you
stuff.
have to have
Yeah.
the intent. You have to have the right intent and stay focused on keeping your mind on, your eye on the ball kind of thing.
Yeah.
Abs- Absolutely. So, I just realized it's like, wow, we've been going a good while here. So definitely, I'm loving this conversation. And I think we could keep going for many hours. Like there's just so much to pull back. And so I'd like to, hope maybe Greg, we could continue to have you on in the future, maybe not, all the time, but the
Right.
timing works well for you, it'd be great to dig into, maybe some individual virtues and practices. And here in a moment, I'd like to ask you just, what are your top five or kind of core, just kind of introduce them and what is that? But and then I also want to hear from Shannon and see if Shannon has any
Yeah.
thoughts on this. She's been fairly quiet for a while now, so I
Totally.
know she's got a lot of thoughts. I'm just like,
She's
oh,
got
like,
a list. She's been
yeah,
taking notes.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I am so overloaded with like everything.
Yeah,
That was just fantastic, honestly, just sitting here and just listening to everything and really like kind of just what I kept going back to, like my primary daily focus, right, is like raising these kids. So it's
Hmm.
just, how to take these to help like define your own virtues so that you can help your kids define theirs. And,
yeah,
really like as a parent, practice what you preach. And,
totally.
just that's kind of like all that's been really swirling around in my in my head. And like, of course, like 5 million other questions about what it was like to, go to samurai school essentially. So like a million questions on that. But yeah, really kind of just in the end, like my thoughts were, my two big thoughts actually were the kids. And then the second one is like, we live in a time where I think our generation and even like younger, like the millennials and whatnot, were kind of raised to question everything,
Hmm.
but not raised to educate themselves on everything. And I think that's like a huge disconnect right there, So you see a lot of like
Totally.
people like asking why, but then not like taking that extra step to answer that question.
Right.
And I think with when it comes to like defining your virtues and like why do you feel you need to stand up for certain things, like that's kind of like a huge thing that, I think we need to kind of show other people, like educate yourself
Totally.
and figure out your whys and
Yeah.
just, yeah, really essentially just like practice what you preach and
Be it.
yeah,
Be
be
the
it.
change. Yeah.
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And I have some grace, with ourselves, like, in that sense, like as a parent, as a, professional, we have all these roles. They all pull us apart in different directions, and so forth. And, we're going to make mistakes. It's just what it's going to be. We would love not to, but in the aspiration towards trying to be better people and then trying to raise good people, um, and then and trying to encourage if you're a leader or a manager to try to imbue some of your teams with, some nobler ethics or you know, systems and stuff.
yeah,
Like we are going to make massive mistakes, most of us. And
And
so,
we need to forgive ourselves and each other for sure.
yeah, and if it, making the climb is the important part. Pumping your feet, trying and then revisiting like my little beads, every day I go through these beads, I can
Yeah.
guarantee you that uh, I am I am definitely very far from sagehood or sainthood or I don't think I'm that much further along than anyone else. But I try. It's forefront in my mind. I'm trying to be conscientious. I'm trying to be, to Shane's point, intentional. And
Yeah.
that's the best we can do. And we're going to fall short, just keep trying and be gracious with ourselves and with the people around us. And for children, they'll see this, they'll know. Like I had a mother who, I'm not going to go into my rough childhood, but I had a mother who made many, many, many mistakes. Um, and not a perfect mother. But when I gave her eulogy um, a few years ago, um, I was asked, I'm the youngest, but for whatever reason, was asked to do it. And and so when I did that, I thought, well, what do I want to say? Because the time that I went through life with her was some of the darker days. It was some of the harder days. Whereas my siblings had, the lighter, chuckly days, and funny anecdotes and stuff. I don't have a lot of funny anecdotes. I have a lot of darkness and despair and hunger and other things. But when I sat down to give that eulogy, I said, what did I learn from my mother? I know what she didn't. I know what I wish she would have done or what she would have been. But what was she? Like, what are the virtues? And I just opened my eulogy to her as I'm talking here. Um, and basically I outlined what were the virtues that she did teach me because she taught me something, even in her imperfection, right? And so the list was determinate. I had my virtue like caused constellation, so a little easier for me to put this stuff together. But she taught me
Yeah.
the determination. She taught me courage. She taught me kindness, compassion, fairness, humor, and most of all, forgiveness. Right. And so my eulogy was all about these lessons that she taught me, even though, from society's perspective, she may have been a horrible mother, whatever, and so, you know, as long as we try, we will do the best we can, whatever that is. And that has to be good enough, you know.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I know. I love that, man. And that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And all of those, I think we could have conversations on each one. I would love you mentioned humor as a virtue, and I think that's just amazing. I was like, I could deep dive there for a while. Like I find that so interesting. Humor is really important and it's really challenged, nowadays. And yeah, so much fantastic stuff. So, man, thank you for a wonderful conversation. It's been so great to have you with us today, and I hope this is the first of many conversations in the future. Typically, here
Thank you.
toward the end of the podcast, we like to, yeah, thank you. We like to let Shannon give us some quotes. She usually pulls up some quotes, and then we'll let Shane close us out with a poem. But before then, anything else, or were those kind of, I asked for your top virtues, and I heard you describe those from your eulogy. Are those kind of
Uh,
the most significant, or are there others? Any closing
s-
thoughts?
yeah, so so it's kind of hard to talk about it without visually showing it, but basically I have a constellation of six, consider them like planets that circle around in an orbit, and humanity,
Yeah.
wisdom, conviction, duty, intelligence, and temperance. And within those are seven sub that just happen to be even, you know. Um, but there are little sub virtues that orbit each of those, little moons, if you will.
Oh,
And
wow.
amongst those, wisdom is the one that I consider the prime. Um,
Is it
and
kind of
the
like the
reason
sun in the constellation, everything orbits?
Yeah. And so around wisdom are nobility, discernment, introspection, gratitude, hope, tranquility, and levity or humor, if you will. And yes, I did put levity or humor in with wisdom and not elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the reason for wisdom, the reason I considered wisdom the critical one is that it's the virtue that refines and checks and balances the other virtues by elevating your perception, refining your judgment and being able to calibrate to make more skillful decisions. And if anyone who knows Aristotle knows he had the concept of practical wisdom, and practical wisdom was the ability to take all this knowledge and experience and theoreticals and actually behaviorally be able to make good decisions or the best decision even if it's in a bad scenario, right?
Yeah, to the
um,
best of your ability based on what you have available to you.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
I consider wisdom to be the prime because can be the one that can interlock, can guide and improve the others to make them far more powerful and potent um, than on their own. And then within those, nobility is the highest. Within the little moons around that orbit wisdom, I consider nobility the highest. And the reason for that is that person needs to aim for something higher than personal pleasure and material goals. Nobility keeps you grounded in a higher purpose rather than using all these virtues and inherent abilities for just self-aggrandizement and manipulation of others and so forth. And so I consider nobility, at least in my belief system or worldview, to be the one that elevates your goals, your will, to harness all of the, your qualities and your skills and your natural gifts for a higher purpose, as opposed to for more banal reasons. And then the second is discernment, because judgment is critical to wisdom, and the ability to refine, your ability to see and understand and question is critical to taking theory into good action. And then lastly, introspection is the third within wisdom, because it requires a deep, humility, first of all, like the ability to look at yourself with a kind of as much objectivity as you can, hold yourself accountable, try to keep you balanced, across all of your roles and responsibilities, your virtues and vices. It's that sort of third eye that gives you the perspective that you need to not fall into the traps of narcissism and other things. And so that's kind of those are my top three, uh, and my take on it.
Ah, that's beautiful, man. Beautiful. I'm thinking as you're saying, I'm like, wow, I'd love to bring you inside the community and like let's do some workshops on this. Let's like I'd love to see some visuals and I mean it's good stuff, for someone who has, from 8 years old recognized your path, right? As I and to use my terminology, right? Just found your path there, saw where your path was at an early age and has pursued that and spent a lifetime reflecting on and exploring and examining and experimenting with these things. Like the wealth of knowledge and experience that you have would be beautiful to be shared. So we'd love to have you in and hear more about that and dive in deeper with you. And thank you so much for what you've been able to share today.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's been my pleasure. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. It is. All right, Shannon, you ready? You got some quotes for us?
You bet I do.
All right, what you got?
Okay. I have Thomas Aquinas said, virtue is acquired by practice and habit, just as science is learned by study.
Mm.
John Fletcher says, virtue begins at home, but should not end there. This
Like that.
That's
unknown. Yeah, I'm not sure who said this. Virtue is not a solitary practice. It is a foundation built through the daily actions that define us.
Word.
Very true.
Yeah.
Word.
Like that.
Aristotle says a virtue is only a virtue when it is practiced, even when
Yes.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, William Shakespeare. The measure of a person is in how they choose to use the strength they possess, for that is the truest practice of virtue.
That's
Nice.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Nobility right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's what I love hearing those quotes. It just I'm sure you guys heard it too. How often the word practice came up with virtue,
That's
and
right.
that's what this is. And I think, Greg, what you've shared with us and helped us to kind of, bring into that knowing and awareness is that virtue is a practice, right? It is something
Yes.
you're going to, and it's something you're going to practice. You're going to experiment. You're going to get up and try today. How do I be a little bit more of this today? And what does that look like? And how do we learn? And, you know, I think the pursuit of those virtues, if people can find what is virtuous to them and pursue that in practice, you know, who knows what the solution for all the problems that we're facing today is. But I feel like it will come from that practice, from people exploring that and experimenting with that, asking those questions and trying to figure out the answer. I mean, I don't think that we're just going to stumble on this, trip over a stone and find it in the mud and go, oh, here's the answer to all our problems. I think it's going to take some self-exploration and practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Shane, you want to close us out?
All right, so sure. This is a poem, so it's going to allude to something, but specifically in this instance, virtue can be assumed that this is one of the things that I'm talking about seeking. And then also, I do talk about the path. Anyway, here we go. Sparks bound in eternity. Every night behind these bars, I hear the song of moon and stars. Through the cave, the hymn abounds. My chains are broken when these sounds come gently whispered in the wind, like secret spells from hidden friends that inspire me to be great. These notions most won't relate to while remaining slaves for a system which misbehaves. So sing I, so sing I while my path I pave until I fall off in my grave. I sing of all I see and hear every day of every year, of the smallest things within our orbit to things so vast we can't absorb it. I can recall of what I've heard, be it badly distorted, blurred, is a reminder that we are free, like sparks bound in eternity. So I rhyme these lines repeatedly of all the best we're meant to see.
Very
Wow.
nice.
It's beautiful,
Very
brother.
nice.
Thank you so much.
I think I heard some Plato's Cave in there somewhere.
Hey, the long and rugged ascent. Here we go.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thanks, Shane.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone that has been listening in with us. We truly appreciate that you share time and space with us now and as many times as people listen to this in the future. And we hope that you continue listening. We love your feedback. And we'll talk to you all again very soon. Thanks.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Gonna find your path, gonna lead the way, stride through the storm, never go astray. Or whisper truth and let your spirit roar. You're a force of nature, crash upon the shore.